Hi, this is Steve Thompson, and you're viewing Check In with the Soup. Today I have a guest, Megan Cox, and Megan has been working on the levy for quite some time and been fully engaged and has even given some of our presentations. And Megan's out in the community and she hears some things, and we're here just to address the questions that Megan's hearing out in the community and make sure you have the information you need. So, Megan, what are you hearing?
Well, one of the things that I'm hearing right now is that everybody really is asking that if the levy does pass, what cuts will return and when will they return? That's a
great question. And the cuts that are on our surveys that people wanted to see returned included most of the things that engaged in student activities, and that being middle school sports, freshman sports, and the supplementals, which would include things like bands and choirs and musicals and key club and clubs of that nature. So all of those cuts are returning based upon what we heard from a survey, provided, of course, that the levy passes. Now, if you'll remember, you were at those meetings as well, Megan. We said if things return, then we have to make cuts elsewhere. So some of the cuts that we're still holding, we're going to hold those building budget cuts. Those will remain in effect, and we will also see a 0% pay increase for all staff, to include administration and teachers. So those cuts are staying in place, but of course that leaves us with cuts that we have to make up for.
And the other part of that question is when, especially around the student activities, because I know I still hear from people that they were very concerned how some activities were cut the day after the levy failed the last time. So I think people would want for those activities to return as soon as possible if the levy does pass.
Right, and they will. So the levy's on March 17th. We've already put in place plans to reactivate everything starting the day after the levy. That would include some of the highlights would be, for example, middle school track, middle school tennis teams. The trickiest one of them all is freshman baseball in terms of sports, because freshman baseball actually begins about 3 weeks before the March levy. So what we will do is all freshmen will come and try out for the varsity and JVs. Those students that don't make the JV or aren't going to play up as freshmen, they'll know they're on the freshman team. They'll be notified you've made the freshman team, and then the freshman team will begin play on March 18th. So we'll move the schedule around a little bit, schedule in some additional games for them. But typically, if you have a child that's ever played baseball or softball, you know that most of the games in March get rained out anyways or snowed out. Maybe not this year, but in normal years. So it's not really, the impact will be fairly minimal. And then in terms of those supplementals, all those supplementals will be reinstated on March 18th. So Key Club will begin meeting again. For example, we have plans right now to have our spring musical still take place. And I'm actually excited about the spring musical. That is going to be the first time we've ever done it, but it will be a collaboration between North and South students together. So that should be really exciting.
Yeah.
So that is all, of course, contingent on our March 17th levy passage.
Okay, so we need the levy to pass.
Yes, we do.
The other thing that I've heard is that, so I've heard all of that, but I've also heard that there could be other cuts.
Right.
Maybe related to the levy, maybe not. Do you know why that is, and could you give an example?
Sure. I think it's important to note and not forget that, had we passed the levy in in November, we would have begun collections in January 20, and since we didn't, we're losing out on a full year's worth of collections. So we're going to lose $8.5 million in collections. It also leaves us in deficit spending for another year, which is approximately a $16 million swing. So it's very significant. So that's why those cuts were made that folks, of course, weren't happy about. But to return those, we have to make those cuts up somewhere else. So currently what we're looking at is we're evaluating all of our staffing levels, We have a plan in place that will not reduce any class options for any students. So students won't lose out on the opportunity to take astronomy or take a STEM class. They won't lose those opportunities. I would be remiss to say one of the things that, going back to the last question that I probably should have thrown in there, is our Soy High School will not return, but busing will. So I'm not sure we mentioned that. But to make up for those cuts that are returning, we're taking a look at our staffing. We've had declining enrollment. All of Northeast Ohio has had declining enrollment for a number of years. But just because you lose 25 or even 50 students in a year doesn't necessarily mean you can make a cut. Because remember, those 25 or 50 kids are spread out over 13 grade levels, over 13 buildings. But as the years start to accumulate, you can start to make adjustments and right size your staff. A lot of these positions we hope to absorb through teacher retirements and not impact a specific teacher, but ultimately those dollars will be made up through reductions in some of our staffing levels.
Makes sense. Thank you, that was great information.
Well, great, and I'm glad you could join us. And for all of you, thank you for watching this week's Check In with the Sue.